The Rio Grande is not simply a line dividing two nations on a map. For the communities that sit along its course, it is the only water supply they have ever had. 7 states across 2 countries, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Chihuahua, Coahuila, Nuevo Leon, and Tamaulipas, share no other major river. There is no alternative route. There is no second option. There is this one river, and right now, that river is vanishing. It starts high in Colorado's San Juan Mountains, at elevations above 12,000 feet, where snow builds up through the winter months. When spring comes, that accumulated snow melts, runs downhill, and becomes the drinking water for Albuquerque's 600,000 residents. The irrigation supply for cotton fields and pecan groves and chili farms, and the legally guaranteed water share for communities stretching hundreds of miles south to the Mexican border and beyond. For thousands of years, that sequence played out without failure. Snow fell, snow melted, the river carried it south, people survived. That sequence is now broken. Elephant Butte Reservoir is the central storage point for the entire Middle Rio Grande Basin. Constructed between 1911 and 1916, it was at its completion the single largest man-made reservoir anywhere in the world. A 301-foot concrete dam holding up to 2.19 million acre-feet of water, enough at full capacity to bury all of Manhattan beneath more than 60 feet of water. Its function was simple: capture the river's flow during high periods, release it on a measured schedule when the land ran dry, a savings account built out of concrete set into desert rock. For decades, that system held together. Farms multiplied, cities spread outward, populations climbed every decade. Each spring, snowmelt came, the reservoir refilled, and whatever the previous dry season had consumed was replaced. The margin was sometimes uncomfortably thin, but it was there. That margin is gone. By the end of 2024, Elephant Butte sat at under 3% of its total holding capacity, not 30%, not even 10%, 3%. Across the entire Rio Grande Basin, New Mexico's reservoirs collectively reached only 13% of their combined storage. And unlike the brief crisis in 2013, when similar lows were reversed by timely rainfall, no recovery appears in any current forecast. In the summer of 2024, the Rio Grande stopped flowing for more than 50 miles, not diminished to a thread, not low enough to wade across, gone entirely. The channel between Albuquerque and Elephant Butte became a long stretch of cracked gray clay, hardened flat under the summer heat, bordered by cottonwood trees already dying from the inside out. Those trees only grow where water is permanent. The water was not permanent. A river that spent millions of years cutting 800-foot canyons through solid basalt north of Taos simply ceased to exist across an entire section of its path. This is not a weather event. This is the accumulated outcome of 100 years of compounding decisions in a system never built to survive what has arrived. The physical explanation is not complicated. About 70% of the Rio Grande's annual volume comes from mountain snowpack. Warmer winters mean less snow accumulates. Springs arriving earlier mean what does accumulate melts before the river channel, and the soil can absorb it. Water that would historically have fed the river through July evaporates in March instead, rising into air that never delivers it back. Layered on top of that physical reduction is a legal demand structure that has not adjusted at all. More than 1.5 million acres of irrigated agricultural land across 3 states hold formal legal rights to draw from this river. Municipal water systems serving cities including Albuquerque, El Paso, and Las Cruces pull from it without interruption. And since 1906, an international treaty has required the United States to deliver 60,000 acre-feet per year to Mexico, every single year, regardless of what the river actually holds that season. That 1906 treaty represents only the first layer of the legal framework stacked on this river. 2 years later, in 1908, the process of dividing the river's water between American states began taking shape. By 1938, the Rio Grande Compact had formally allocated every drop of the river between Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, distributing water that had not yet fallen from the sky based on flow measurements recorded during unusually wet decades. No buffer was written in for sustained dry periods. No mechanism existed to adjust for population growth. And nothing at all prepared the system for a future in which the underlying climate would permanently reduce the volume those historical measurements were built on. The compact was designed for a river that no longer exists. The people who depend on it are now trapped between legal guarantees and physical reality. The legal battles that have followed stretch back generations. In 2023, New Mexico agreed to pay Texas $144 million to settle a lawsuit over water the state had failed to send downstream across prior years. One American state paying another $144 million, not because of deliberate diversion or sabotage, but because the water that was legally owed simply was not present in the system to deliver. The settlement closed that specific case. It did not repair the underlying arithmetic. Internationally, the same gap exists with added layers. The 1944 water treaty with Mexico requires the country to deliver 350,000 acre-feet annually from Rio Grande tributaries flowing north. Mexico has fallen short of that commitment repeatedly in recent years. The cause is not evasion. Chihuahua is fighting its own water emergency. Communities and farmers in northern Mexico have staged protests, some of them turning violent, over federal decisions to redirect water needed locally toward meeting international obligations. Texas agricultural operations waiting on those Mexican deliveries have pushed hard for federal action. Diplomatic back and forth has produced little movement. The river itself does not resolve these claims. It simply runs lower while everyone argues over what is left. What most Albuquerque residents are unaware of is that a substantial portion of their daily water supply does not originate from the Rio Grande. The San Juan Chama project, finished in the early 1970s, runs a tunnel straight through the Continental Divide to import water from Colorado River tributaries on the Rockies' western slope. That water enters northern New Mexico, joins the Rio Grande drainage, and has supplemented local supply through dry periods for more than 50 years. It was engineered as a safety net, the reserve system that would carry the region through the years when the primary river fell short. In 2025, the San Juan Chama project recorded its lowest allocation since construction, not because of any equipment failure, not because of poor management, because the Colorado River, the source of that imported supply, is under sustained strain of its own. Lake Powell and Lake Mead, the two enormous reservoirs that store Colorado River water for use across the entire American West, have spent years at critically low levels. The 7 states sharing the Colorado are locked in their own ongoing allocation disputes over a supply that is also shrinking. There is simply less available to divert toward New Mexico than at any point in the project's operational history. The backup plan reached its limit at precisely the moment the primary plan hit its floor. Researchers at the University of New Mexico have stated the conclusion plainly. The state's water ledger no longer balances. The river cannot fulfill what has been promised. The import system cannot bridge the difference. Demand has not contracted to meet the reduced supply. Bureau of Reclamation models projecting Elephant Butte's trajectory through 2050 show, under the median climate scenario, the reservoir reaching functionally empty within 15 to 20 years, not 3% empty. A wide excavation in the New Mexico desert where a full reservoir once sat. The communities already living these numbers are not abstractions. Hatch, New Mexico is a town of approximately 1,700 people. Its surrounding valley produces more green chili per acre than any location on Earth. The combination of volcanic soil, growing season length, and high desert sun generates a flavor that farmers elsewhere have spent decades attempting to copy with consistent failure. Every acre of that production depends on Rio Grande water delivered through the Elephant Butte Irrigation District. In 2024, that district received roughly half of a normal year's allocation. Farmers made impossible calculations, plant half the fields and absorb the loss, or leave everything fallow and wait. Many chose to leave fields empty for the first time in their family's history. Seasonal workers found no work to come for. The fuel suppliers, equipment repair shops, and restaurants that depend on an active agricultural season watched their revenue contract without warning. Albuquerque is managing its own version of the same emergency. The city has built one of the more technically advanced urban water recycling systems in the country, treating municipal wastewater and re-injecting it into underground aquifers for later recovery. The engineering is genuinely impressive. but that system functions on the assumption that wet years will periodically recharge what dry years consume. Wet years have become rare. In 2025, the Rio Grande riverbed through the middle of New Mexico's largest city has been dry since spring. The scientific term that matters most here is not drought. It is aridification. Drought is temporary, a downward deviation from a stable baseline that eventually corrects. Aridification is a shift in the baseline itself. The new average is drier than the old average, and on the time scale of human infrastructure and legal agreements, that shift is permanent in every practical sense. The Rio Grande Basin has warmed approximately 2 degrees over the past century, in a desert system already operating at the outer boundary of what can support agriculture and dense human settlement. 2 degrees changes evaporation rates from open water, from exposed soil, and from every plant the river system supports. Snow melts earlier. Less of it reaches the channel before it rises back into the atmosphere. Research measuring the river's natural flow, the volume the climate alone would deliver, with zero human withdrawals factored out, found a decline of more than 25% since 1980. A quarter of the river's water, not taken by farms or cities, simply no longer making it downstream. Adaptation efforts are underway, and some are genuinely innovative. Drip irrigation systems in the Hatch Valley are cutting agricultural water consumption by 40% compared to traditional flood methods. Albuquerque's aquifer reinjection program represents real forward thinking in municipal water management. Compact renegotiation talks are attempting to align legal allocation figures with current climate data rather than 1930s measurements. None of these efforts are trivial. Together they remain insufficient to close the distance between what the river currently produces and what 6 million people in the United States alone, plus 1.5 million in Juarez directly across from El Paso, have been legally guaranteed. The honest answer from the scientists who study this system, the one they will give directly when asked, is that the Rio Grande Basin will be unrecognizable in 3 decades compared to today. Some communities will adapt, investing in infrastructure and legal maneuvering, finding ways to stretch less water further. Others will not survive the gap. Water will follow money and institutional capacity. The small farming communities, indigenous settlements, and lower-income neighborhoods at the far end of the distribution system will lose supply first and most completely. The Rio Grande shaped this part of the continent over millions of years. It held through ice ages and volcanic upheaval and geological transformations that remade entire mountain ranges. What it is struggling to survive is the intersection of a climate that has permanently reduced its volume and a legal and political system that continues issuing promises based on water that is no longer there. The river has not disappeared, not entirely, not yet, but the gap between what it holds and what has been promised is no longer a problem that can be deferred through negotiations and engineering patches. The decisions that determine what comes next are overdue, and the river is not waiting for them to be made.